The bustling streets of the city of Aya were a chaotic symphony of desperate ambitions and crushing realities, a place where the wide gulf between the wealthy elite and the struggling poor was carved deeply into the very landscape. In the heart of the city's most forgotten ghetto, where the dusty, unpaved paths wound tightly around cramped, iron-sheeted tenements, lived Nnamdi. Nnamdi was a young man whose spirit was being quietly eroded by the relentless tides of unemployment and poverty. 2 years had passed since he walked across the university graduation stage, his heart bursting with pride as he received his degree with a second-class upper division. He had believed, with the naive optimism of youth, that his academic success would be the golden key to unlock a life of comfort for himself, and, more importantly, for his aging mother. But reality had been a brutal schoolmaster. For 24 agonizing months, Nnamdi's daily routine had consisted of polishing his resume, pounding the scorching pavement in his only pair of rapidly thinning leather shoes, and facing an endless barrage of rejections. On this particular late afternoon, the sun hung low over Aya like a dull copper coin, casting long, melancholic shadows across the busy path that led to his one-room apartment. Nnamdi walked with his head lowered, the weight of another failed interview pulling at his shoulders. His corporate shirt was half unbuttoned, his tie completely loosened and hanging limply around his neck like a noose of failed expectations. In his right hand, he clutched a weathered manila file containing the certificates that promised a bright future but delivered nothing but heartache. As he walked, the mocking echoes of the interviewers from that morning played on a loop in his mind, their voices cold, detached, and final. "We need someone with experience, young man. Sorry, sir, but we will get back to you." He closed his eyes briefly, a bitter sigh escaping his lips. How on earth was he supposed to gain experience if no one in the entire corporate landscape was willing to give a fresh graduate a chance? The hypocrisy of the system felt like a heavy stone in his chest, suffocating his hopes and leaving him with a profound sense of defeat. When Nnamdi finally reached his apartment, the old wooden door groaned on its rusted hinges as he pushed it open, stepping into a space that felt more like a concrete cell than a home. The room was small, painfully small, containing nothing more than a thin mattress laid directly on the bare floor, a single plastic chair, and a small corner dedicated to a kerosene stove and a few mismatched pots. A deep, familiar wave of frustration settled deep within his bones as he looked around the cramped quarters. This was not the life he had envisioned. It was certainly not the life his mother had practically destroyed her own body to give him. He collapsed onto the mattress, burying his face in his hands as the tears he had tightly suppressed. All day finally broke free, wetting his palms. He thought of his mother, a woman of immense strength and dignity, whose hands were permanently calloused from decades of working on other people's farms in the distant village, enduring backbreaking labor just to send him upkeep money that she herself desperately needed. At his age, he was supposed to be the pillar of support, the proud son sending home large allowances to build her a proper brick house. Instead, he was 26, starving, and still waiting for handouts from a woman who had already given him her entire life. Reaching into his pocket, Nnamdi pulled out his remaining cash, counting the crumpled notes with a sinking heart. The amount was so small it was insulting. It couldn't buy a proper balanced meal. With a heavy sigh, he realized all he could afford for dinner was a small loaf of stale bread and a single sachet of water. He stared at the money, his empty stomach growling in protest, while a dark cloud of hopelessness threatened to swallow him entirely. Suddenly, the silence of the room was broken by the sharp ringing of his mobile phone. He glanced at the cracked screen and felt a sudden tightening in his throat as the word "mama" flashed repeatedly. He let it ring for a few seconds, clearing his throat and trying to compose his voice so she wouldn't detect the absolute ruin of his spirit. "Hello, Mama," he said, forcing a warmth he didn't feel. "My son." Her voice came through, rich, gentle, and overflowing with maternal love that instantly made Nnamdi's eyes well up again. "How are you? How did the big interview go today?" Nnamdi closed his eyes tightly, the silence stretching between them like a vast ocean. He had given her the same disappointing answer so many times that the words felt like ashes in his mouth. "They said the same thing again, Mama," he whispered, his voice cracking slightly despite his best efforts. "They need someone with years of experience, and they told me they would get back to me." A soft, sorrowful sigh traveled over the line from the village. "I am so sorry, my son," she said quietly. Nnamdi shook his head, looking down at his worn-out floorboards. "Mama, I am just so tired. I am tired of being a burden to you. You suffered so much to put me through university, working yourself to the bone on those farms. I thought by now things would be different. I thought I would be taking care of you, but look at me. I can barely afford to feed myself." His mother's voice instantly shifted, becoming fierce and firm with unconditional belief. "Do not speak like that, Nnamdi. You have not failed. Life does not always follow our calendar, but that does not mean God has forgotten you. You have never, ever disappointed me, do you hear me? I know how hard you try, and I know that one day this season of lack will pass into history." Nnamdi swallowed hard, desperately wishing he possessed even a fraction of the confidence she had in him. The conversation took a painful turn when his mother mentioned, almost casually, that the wealthy plantation owner, whose fields she had been weeding for the past month, had still not paid her his wages. "But the moment he pays me my money, Nnamdi, I will send you something for food," she promised. Hearing that broke something deep inside Nnamdi's heart. The sheer injustice of a wealthy man withholding a poor widow's hard-earned pennies, while his son starved in the city, was almost too much to bear. "When will all this suffering stop, Mama? You deserve a soft life, not this continuous torment," he choked out. "Everything will be all right, my son," she replied soothingly. "I pray for you every single day, and lately I have been having beautiful dreams about your future. If I tell you the details now, you will start analyzing it with your big university brain, but I know in my spirit that a massive breakthrough is coming. Don't just hope for it, Nnamdi. Believe it. Stay focused, keep applying, and don't you dare give up on yourself." After they hung up, Nnamdi sat in the fading light, his mother's words vibrating in his mind. He went out to purchase his meager dinner of bread and water, and upon returning, he pulled out a folded, sweat-stained sheet of paper from his backpack. It was his personal prayer list. At the very top of that list, written in bold, determined letters, was the name of the most prestigious corporate empire in the country, Jamari Oil and Gas. Jamari Oil and Gas was the ultimate dream, a global titan where a career could completely alter the trajectory of a generation. Throughout his university years, Nnamdi had tailored his studies specifically to match their standards, dreaming of the day he would walk through their glass doors as a respected employee. Yet, despite submitting his resume to their human resources portal dozens of times, he had never received a single acknowledgement. He stared at the name on the paper, bowed his head in the dark room, and poured his soul into a desperate prayer for an open door, a single chance to prove his worth. He finally drifted into a restless sleep, entirely unaware that the invisible wheels of destiny were already turning, and that far away from his squalid neighborhood, in a completely different world, a sequence of events was unfolding that would soon collide with his life in a shocking way. In a wealthy, gated community on the completely opposite side of Aya, the atmosphere was one of absolute luxury, peace, and abundance. Inside a sprawling, architecturally stunning mansion surrounded by manicured lawns and high-security walls, lived Mr. Darrow and his heavily pregnant wife, Ifeoma. Mr. Darrow was a brilliant, highly successful offshore oil rig engineer who commanded a massive salary and held significant influence within the energy sector. His career required him to work in intense cycles. 2 weeks out at sea on the remote drilling platforms, followed by 2 weeks of uninterrupted luxury at home with his beautiful wife. This particular night was deeply emotional for the couple, as it marked the very last evening they would share before Mr. Darrow had to board an early morning flight back to the offshore rig for his next 14-day shift. Ifeoma sat comfortably on an expensive plush leather sofa, her hands resting gently over her large, protruding belly. Earlier that afternoon, they had visited a private maternal clinic for a routine checkup, and the obstetrician had delivered a startling piece of news. Ifeoma's was already showing early signs that labor could begin spontaneously at any moment over the next few days. The news had sparked a wave of anxiety in Mr. Darrow's chest. This was their very first child, a long-awaited miracle, and the thought of being thousands of miles away in the middle of the ocean while his wife went through childbirth was terrifying. To mitigate the risk, the couple had arranged for Ifeoma's younger sister to fly in from the eastern province to stay at the mansion, ensuring she would have a trusted companion and helper the moment the contractions began. Mr. Darrow looked at his wife, his eyes filled with profound adoration as he reached over and placed his hand over hers on her stomach. "You know, sweetheart," he murmured softly, "looking at you right now, I genuinely feel like the luckiest man on the face of the earth. You have stood by me through every difficult project, every long absence, and now you are about to give me the greatest gift a man could ever ask for." Ifeoma blushed, a radiant, beautiful smile breaking across her face as she leaned her head against his broad shoulder. If we are being completely honest, I am the lucky one, she replied softly. You provide for us, you protect us, and you love me with a fierceness that makes me feel completely safe. I just wish the timing of this deployment was different. I hate that you have to leave tomorrow morning.
Mr.
Darrow squeezed her hand tightly, a shadow of regret crossing his handsome face. I know, my love. I tried to request a shift swap, but with the new drilling operations starting, my presence is legally required. But I have already booked your sister's flight ticket. I wanted her to come tomorrow morning, but she has her absolute final university examination paper in 48 hours, and I couldn't bear to make her ruin her academic future. Her flight lands in exactly 3 days. Ifeoma nodded understandingly, trying to soothe his obvious worry. 3 days will pass in the blink of an eye, darling. I will be perfectly fine here. The house is secure, and I will just rest and watch television. Don't stress yourself while you are on the rig. Despite her reassuring words, an eerie sense of foreboding hung faintly in the air, a silent truth that nature rarely adheres to human schedules or corporate timetables. As the clock ticked past midnight, Mr. Darrow reluctantly stood up to double-check his packed luggage, knowing he had to wake up before dawn to catch the company's private shuttle to the airfield. Ifeoma stood up slowly, her movements heavy and deliberate due to the advanced stage of her pregnancy, and walked him to the bedroom, both of them enveloped in the warm comfort of their wealth, completely oblivious to the fact that within the next 48 hours, an unpredictable crisis would tear through their peaceful life, stripping away the illusion that money can control every outcome. The next morning, long before the first golden rays of dawn could pierce the horizon, Nnamdi was abruptly awakened in his dark ghetto room by the loud, persistent ringing of his phone. He fumbled in the dark, his heart racing with sudden panic as he picked up the device, assuming there was an emergency with his mother in the village. He pressed the phone to his ear, his voice thick with sleep. Hello? A crisp, highly professional and melodic voice responded from the other end. Good morning. Am I speaking with Mr. Nnamdi? Nnamdi sat up straight on his mattress, his internal radar instantly alerting him. Yes, this is Nnamdi speaking. Good morning, the voice continued, sending a massive jolt of electricity straight through his spine. My name is Grace, and I am calling from the Human Resources Department of Jamari Oil and Gas. We have been reviewing your academic portfolio and your repeated applications for our graduate trainee program. We are highly impressed by your second-class upper degree in engineering, and we would like to formally invite you for a definitive interview. The panel has an emergency opening tomorrow morning at exactly 7 a.m. at our corporate headquarters in the Central Business District. Will you be available? Nnamdi's breath caught completely in his throat. His heart hammered against his ribs so violently he was certain the woman could hear it through the line. Jamari Oil and Gas was actually calling him. The prayer he had uttered in tears just hours prior had somehow bypassed the cold machinery of corporate indifference. Yes, ma'am, I will absolutely, standardly be there. I will be early, he stammered, his eyes wide with a sudden, brilliant flash of hope. Excellent, Grace replied smoothly. Please ensure you arrive with all your original credentials. Punctuality is a core metric of our evaluation. We look forward to meeting you. The call clicked shut, leaving Nnamdi sitting in the profound silence of his room, tears of pure, unadulterated joy streaming down his face. He fell to his knees on the cold concrete floor, sobbing out words of intense gratitude. The years of degradation, the mocking words of neighbors who laughed at his useless degree, the shame of being unable to buy a decent meal. All of it was about to evaporate. He immediately called his mother, who answered on the first ring as if she had been awake waiting for the manifestation of her dreams. Mama, they called me. Jamari Oil and Gas just invited me for an interview tomorrow morning, Nnamdi shouted into the receiver. The phone line practically exploded with his mother's ecstatic praises and prayers, her voice cracking with joyful tears as she began to decree favor, wisdom, and success upon her son. I told you, Nnamdi. I told you God was preparing something massive. Go there tomorrow and claim the destiny that belongs to you. For the remainder of that day, Nnamdi transformed into a man possessed by a singular burning purpose. He ironed his sole corporate suit with meticulous care, ensuring there wasn't a single wrinkle on the fabric. He polished his shoes until they reflected the dim light of his room, and he spent over 12 hours memorizing engineering formulas, corporate case studies, and advanced interview strategies. He went to bed that night with a smile on his face, knowing that the morning sun would usher him into the most critical, life-altering job interview of his entire existence. The next morning, at exactly 5:30 a.m., Nnamdi was already fully dressed, looking sharp and immaculate in his neat suit, holding his precious manila file like a shield of honor. He stepped out of his ghetto apartment just as the city was beginning to wake up, boarding a commercial bus that rattled through the waking streets of Aya toward the affluent business district. He had calculated his transit time perfectly. He wanted to arrive at the Jamari Oil and Gas skyscraper at least 45 minutes before the scheduled 7 a.m. start time to compose his mind and ensure absolute compliance with their strict punctuality rules. As the bus dropped him off near the sweeping, beautiful neighborhood of the corporate elites, Nnamdi decided to take a quiet pedestrian shortcut through a residential street lined with massive, elegant mansions to avoid the burgeoning main road traffic. Meanwhile, inside the silent, sprawling mansion of Mr. Darrow, a terrifying emergency had just erupted. Ifeoma had been sleeping peacefully when she was suddenly violently awoken by an excruciating, white-hot flash of pain tearing through her lower abdomen. She let out a piercing, agonizing scream that echoed uselessly off the high, expensive ceilings of the empty house. "Ah! Oh my God," she gasped, clutching her stomach as a wave of intense, uncontrollable contractions hit her with a ferocity she was completely unprepared for. Within minutes, her water broke right there on the bed, and she realized with absolute horror that the baby was coming immediately, days ahead of the doctor's estimate. Her husband was already miles away on an offshore platform with zero cellular reception. Her sister was in a different province, and she was completely terrifyingly alone in a massive house. Trembling with agonizing pain and blind panic, she grabbed her phone to call an emergency ambulance or a ride-sharing service, but to her absolute despair, the screen displayed a devastating message. Due to an early morning labor strike among transit workers in that specific sector, the nearest available emergency driver was over 25 minutes away. Another contraction tore through her body so violent it literally brought her to her knees on the polished hardwood floor. She knew she couldn't wait 25 minutes. She could feel the terrifying reality that if she didn't get to a hospital immediately, both she and her unborn child could face fatal complications. Using every single ounce of physical strength left in her breaking body, Ifeoma dragged herself out of the bedroom, using the marble walls for support as she crawled and stumbled through the vast, empty living room. Tears of intense physical agony and psychological terror blinded her as she finally reached the heavy front door, throwing it open and crying out into the empty, quiet street with a voice that was rapidly losing strength. "Help me! Please, somebody help me, my baby!" Just at that exact moment, Nnamdi was walking briskly down the sidewalk of that very same quiet residential street, his mind fully locked on the interview, which was now just 30 minutes away. He was visualizing himself walking into the Jamari boardroom when a sharp, desperate, and deeply pained scream pierced the quiet morning air. Nnamdi stopped dead in his tracks, his heart skipping a beat. He listened intently, and a second later, an even more agonizing shriek echoed from behind a massive black iron gate just a few meters ahead of him. "Help, please, I am alone. The baby is coming." Nnamdi's breath hitched. He checked his wristwatch with frantic eyes. It was exactly 6:35 a.m. If he stopped for even a single minute, his perfect timeline to reach Jamari Oil and Gas would be completely shattered, and his dream of escaping poverty would be ruined forever. But the cries coming from behind that gate were not just cries of pain. They were the desperate life-or-death pleas of a human being in deep torment. Nnamdi stood frozen on the pavement, caught in a brutal, agonizing crucible of choice. Should he ignore the stranger to chase the one opportunity he had prayed for his entire life? Or should he risk everything, including his mother's future, to answer the cry of a dying woman? As he hesitated, the massive iron gate slowly began to click open, and Ifeoma appeared, collapsing onto the gravel driveway, her eyes locked onto him with a look of absolute desperation that would haunt his soul forever. The sight of Ifeoma collapsing onto the sharp gravel of the driveway, clutching her abdomen as her body shook with another violent contraction, shattered Nnamdi's paralysis. In that agonizing heartbeat, the immaculate glass tower of Jamari Oil and Gas seemed to blur against the stark, visceral reality of human suffering happening right before his eyes. He rushed through the open gate, dropping to his knees beside the heavily pregnant woman, his pristine suit trousers soaking up the morning dust. Madam, please stay with me. I'm here, you are not alone, he cried out, his voice laced with panic as he gently supported her shoulders. Afioma could barely open her eyes, her face drenched in a cold sweat, her fingers clawing desperately at Nnamdi's sleeve with a terrifying vice-like grip.
Please, the hospital. It's turning dark.
My baby isn't moving right, she wheezed, her voice dropping to a fragile whisper that terrified Nnamdi to his very core. He looked down at his wristwatch, the digital numbers ticking mercilessly to 6:38 a.m. The corporate headquarters was a 10-minute drive away, but if he stayed here, if he committed to saving this stranger, he would be thrown off the precipice of his destiny. He felt a sickening weight in his stomach, a profound, agonizing conflict pulling his soul in two opposing directions. This was the moment he had built his entire youth toward. This was the answer to his mother's tears. If he walked away right now, closed his eyes, and ran down the street, he could still make it to the interview on time. He could pretend he never heard her, but as he looked at Ifeoma's pale, tear-streaked face, he knew that leaving her would mean murdering his own humanity. Frenziedly, he reached into his pocket as his phone vibrated once more. It was his mother, calling from the village to give him one final blessing before he stepped into the boardroom. Nnamdi answered with a trembling hand, his voice thick with uncontainable emotion. Mama, I'm in trouble, he whispered, watching Ifeoma convulse with another wave of intense pain. My son, what is wrong? Are you at the office? His mother asked, her voice instantly sharp with anxiety. Nnamdi quickly explained the horrific scene unfolding in front of him. The empty mansion, the bleeding, screaming pregnant woman, the total lack of emergency services, and the brutal reality that if he didn't drive her to the clinic immediately, she and her child might not survive the morning. But Mama, if I do this, I will miss the Jamari interview. They told me punctuality is everything. They will disqualify me instantly. 2 years of waiting, Mama, gone. Nnamdi sobbed openly, the sheer weight of the injustice crushing his chest. On the other end of the line, the poor village widow, who had spent her life performing back-breaking labor for cruel landlords, didn't hesitate for a single second. Her voice came through the speaker, steady, filled with a deep ancestral wisdom. Nnamdi, listen to me very carefully. A job is a piece of paper, but a human life is a breath from God Almighty. If you abandon that woman to chase money, the money will become a curse upon your head. Go into that house, find her keys, and save that child. If that job truly belongs to you by divine right, the hearts of this interviewers will wait for you. Do the right thing, my son. Those words acted like a sudden burst of clarity through the fog of Nnamdi's panic. He thanked his mother, hung up the phone, and looked at Ifeoma, whose breathing was becoming shallower. Where are the car keys, ma'am? Tell me where the keys are, he urged. Inside, living room, center table, black SUV in the garage, she managed to gasp out before crying out in agony once more. Nnamdi didn't waste a millisecond. He bounded up the marble steps of the mansion, bursting into the luxurious living room. In his frantic haste, he scanned the space, spotted the heavy key fob on the glass center table, grabbed it, and accidentally dropped his precious manila folder, the one containing his degree, his certifications, and his resume, onto one of the expensive leather armchairs. His mind was racing so fast, fueled by raw adrenaline, that he didn't even realize he had left his entire professional identity behind. He ran back out to the driveway, unlocked the massive luxury vehicle, and with immense care helped Ifeoma into the spacious back seat, adjusting her into a position that would minimize the shock of the road. He jumped into the driver's seat, hit the ignition button, and the powerful engine roared to life. Throwing the vehicle into reverse, he tore out of the gated compound and swung onto the main road. Navigating the morning traffic with the precision of a seasoned driver driven by sheer desperation, the drive to the nearest private hospital was a blur of high-speed turns and breathless prayers. Nnamdi kept his eyes glued to the road while constantly checking the rearview mirror to monitor Ifeoma, who was screaming and praying in the back seat, her hands clutching her belly as the contractions peaked every 60 seconds. Nnamdi's heart plummeted as he glanced at the car's digital dashboard clock. 6:52 a.m. The interview was starting in 8 minutes, and he was driving in the exact opposite direction of the corporate district. The sheer biting injustice of the universe felt like a physical slap in the face. Why today? Why this exact hour? Why did his act of pure kindness have to be penalized by the destruction of his lifelong dream? He wanted to scream at the sky, to demand why the wicked and selfish always seemed to prosper, while the compassionate were left to rot in the gutter. Yet, despite the bitterness rising in his throat, he did not slow down. He pushed the vehicle faster, weaving through lanes until the neon emergency sign of the St. Jude Medical Complex appeared in the distance. He slammed on the brakes in the ambulance bay, threw open the doors, and ran into the reception area, shouting at the top of his lungs for immediate medical assistance. Emergency! Pregnant woman in full labor. She's alone, please help her! Within seconds, a team of emergency room nurses and an obstetrician rushed out with a gurney, swarming the back seat of the vehicle. They carefully lifted Ifoma out, her face twisted in a mask of exhaustion. As they began wheeling her rapidly toward the delivery wing, she suddenly reached out her hand, catching Nnamdi's wrist with a frail but resolute grip. Tears poured down her cheeks as she looked up at the young man who had risked everything for her. Nnamdi, your interview, please run, go now. God will reward you, she whispered, before the double doors of the surgical ward swung shut, cutting off her voice. Nnamdi stood in the sterile white hallway, his chest heaving, his suit covered in dust and sweat, his breathing ragged. He walked over to the nurse's station, his hands trembling as he placed the car keys on the counter. Please, he told the receptionist, his voice hollow. These belong to the patient, Mrs. Ifeoma. Keep them safe for her. I have to go. He turned around, walking out of the hospital doors into the bright morning sun, suddenly realizing with a sickening jolt that his hands were completely empty. His manila file was missing. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. He had left his entire academic life, his references, his original certificates on the chair inside her mansion. Without those documents, walking into Jamari Oil and Gas was a complete exercise in futility. Panic, dark and suffocating, seized his mind. He turned around and began to sprint back toward the residential neighborhood, his polished shoes pounding against the hard asphalt, his lungs burning with exertion. He ran like a madman, ignoring the strange looks from passers-by, driven by a faint, desperate hope that he could retrieve the folder and somehow, by some miracle, still salvage the day. When he finally arrived back at the mansion, he burst through the open gate, ran into the living room, and grabbed the manila folder from the leather chair, where it sat like a silent monument to his distraction. He didn't pause for a single breath. He spun on his heel and began running toward the central business district. His eyes locked onto the towering glass skyscraper of Jamari Oil and Gas that dominated the city's skyline. But as he ran, the cruel mathematics of time caught up with him. By the time he finally crossed the grand plaza of the corporate headquarters and pushed through the revolving glass doors into the hyper-modern reception area, his digital watch read exactly 7:32 a.m. He was 32 minutes late for the strict, unforgiving world of corporate energy. The reception lobby of Jamari Oil and Gas was a temple of wealth and cold efficiency, filled with polished marble, ambient lighting, and high-security turnstiles. Nnamdi stood there, a stark, tragic figure, his hair disheveled, his face streaked with sweat, his clothes slightly crumpled from the morning's chaos, clutching his folder tightly against his chest. He approached the sleek mahogany reception desk, where a beautiful, unbothered receptionist sat typing away on a curved computer monitor. Good morning, Nnamdi panted, trying desperately to stabilize his breathing. My name is Nnamdi. I am here for the graduate trainee engineering interview. I know I am late, but please, there was an extreme life-or-death emergency on the road. The receptionist slowly looked up, her eyes scanning his disheveled appearance with a look of undisguised disdain and judgment. She didn't see a hero. She saw a messy, unprofessional young man from the lower class, making pathetic excuses for his lack of discipline. She checked her digital dashboard with a slow, deliberate click of her mouse. Mr. Nnamdi, the interview session began promptly at 7 a.m. Punctuality is our primary filter. The panel does not tolerate delays for any reason whatsoever, she said, her voice dripping with artificial corporate politeness. Please, I beg of you, just page the HR manager, Nnamdi pleaded, his eyes filling with tears of pure desperation. Just tell them I am here. Let me explain what happened. A woman's life was on the line. Before the receptionist could even respond, the heavy elevator doors behind her chimed, and a middle-aged man stepped out into the lobby. This was Mr. Henderson, the head of human resources at Jamari Oil and Gas, an arrogant, status-obsessed antagonist who ruled his department with an iron fist and viewed applicants from poor backgrounds as beneath his notice. He wore a bespoke designer suit, a luxury watch gleaming on his wrist, and his face was set in a permanent expression of cold superiority. He noticed the commotion at the desk and walked over, his eyes narrowing as he took in Nnamdi's sweat-stained shirt and dusty shoes. "What is the meaning of this noise in my lobby, mister?" Henderson demanded, his voice echoing sharply across the marble floor. The receptionist quickly straightened up. "Sir, this is the applicant who was scheduled for 7 a.m. He just arrived, claiming there was an emergency, mister." Henderson looked at Nnamdi, a cruel, mocking sneer playing at the corners of his mouth. He didn't offer a single shred of empathy. Instead, he saw an opportunity to exert his absolute power and humiliate a helpless applicant. "An emergency? How incredibly cliché," Mr. Henderson scoffed, crossing his arms arrogantly. "Let me tell you something, young man. In this company, we deal in millions of barrels of oil and billions of dollars. We do not deal in excuses. If you cannot manage your time for the most important interview of your pathetic life, you are utterly useless to this organization." Nnamdi felt the words pierce his heart like jagged glass, but he swallowed his pride. Lowering his head in deep humility, "Sir, please, I am begging you for just 5 minutes. A heavily pregnant woman was dying in the street, alone. I had to drive her to the St. Jude Hospital. I couldn't leave her to perish. Please, look at my credentials. I graduated with a second-class upper. I have the knowledge, I have the passion," Nnamdi cried out, holding out his manila folder, with trembling hands, practically kneeling before the ruthless manager. "But Mr. Henderson merely laughed, a cold, dry sound that filled the lobby with an intense sense of injustice. He reached out, casually swiped the folder from Nnamdi's hands, and without even opening it, tossed it carelessly onto the reception counter. "I don't care if you save the entire planet, boy. The rules are the rules. The interview process for your slot is permanently closed, and we have already selected a candidate from a prestigious international background who actually understands the value of time. Look at yourself. You look like a common street beggar who rolled out of a gutter. You are a disgrace to the corporate image of Jamari Oil and Gas. Security, eject this latecomer from my building immediately and ensure his name is blacklisted from our database forever." The sheer cruelty of the antagonist was staggering, leaving the viewers with a burning hatred for his arrogance and a profound, weeping empathy for Nnamdi, who stood completely crushed, destroyed by his own righteousness, as 2 burly security guards stepped forward to grab his arms, dragging him toward the exit, while Mr. Henderson watched with an amused, victorious smirk. The cold iron gates of Jamari Oil and Gas slammed shut behind Nnamdi with a heavy metallic finality that felt like the closing of a tomb. He stumbled onto the scorching pavement of the public sidewalk, his body trembling, his mind entirely numb, as the tears he had tried so hard to suppress began to flow down his sweat-stained face in hot, bitter tracks. The sheer suffocating weight of the injustice he had just experienced crushed his spirit into 1,000 jagged pieces. He had done what any decent human being should do. He had saved a dying woman and her unborn child from a horrific fate, and yet the corporate system had punished him for his empathy, branding him an unprofessional failure and tossing him into the gutter like common trash. He walked aimlessly down the streets of the business district, his immaculate manila folder clutched loosely against his chest like the broken fragments of a shattered dream. His legs felt weak, completely hollowed out by the emotional trauma, and he eventually collapsed onto a concrete bench at a nearby public park, burying his face in his hands as deep, chest-heaving sobs tore through him. He thought of his mother in the village, waiting anxiously by her phone, praying for the call that would announce their liberation from poverty. How could he tell her that his kindness had ruined everything? How could he explain that the world they lived in despised mercy and rewarded cold, unfeeling arrogance? Meanwhile, back inside the glass palace of Jamari Oil and Gas, Mr. Henderson was entirely unaffected by the human tragedy he had just orchestrated. He walked back into the executive suite with a smug, self-satisfied grin plastered across his face, adjusting his gold cufflinks with the supreme confidence of a man who believed he was utterly untouchable. To him, Nnamdi was just another nameless, lower-class, desperate soul to be stepped on, a microscopic bug easily crushed beneath the heel of his designer leather shoes. Mr. Henderson poured himself a glass of expensive scotch from the crystal decanter in his office, celebrating his absolute power over the hiring process. He immediately called the candidate he had secretly intended to hire all along, the son of a wealthy political associate who had barely passed his university exams, but possessed the right connections. "The slot is yours, my boy, Mr. Henderson chuckling into the phone, his voice dripping with nepotism and corruption. Some gutter-born trash tried to beg for a chance today, with some pathetic story about saving a pregnant woman. But I threw him out like the garbage he is. Punctuality and status are everything here, you know. Welcome to the team. The viewer's hatred for this callous antagonist burns with a furious heat as he toasts to his own malice, completely unaware that his overt cruelty had just set a divine, karmic trap for his own spectacular ruin. Back in his dark, no, stifling one-room apartment in the ghetto, Nnamdi spent 3 days wrapped in a shroud of deep depression, barely eating or sleeping. The silence of his room was deafening, a mocking reminder of his failure. On the fourth day, remembering his promise to his mother to find any work to survive, he washed his face, swallowed his immense pride, and walked through the dusty paths of the ghetto until he found a small, local supermarket that was hiring entry-level store attendants. The pay was a miserable pittance, barely enough to cover his rent and a few basic meals. But Nnamdi accepted the uniform with profound humility and gratitude. From that moment on, he threw himself into the back-breaking, menial labor with the same dedication he would have given to a multi-billion-dollar oil firm. From 6 a.m. until late into the night, Nnamdi could be found sweeping the dusty floors, scrubbing the sticky juice off the shelves, lifting heavy wooden crates of produce until his palms blistered, and neatly arranging cans of condensed milk. He wore his cheap supermarket name tag with a strange, quiet dignity, refusing to let his circumstances corrupt his core values. He greeted every single customer, from the poorest beggars to the arrogant middle-class shoppers, with a warm, respectful smile and an open heart, earning the secret admiration of the store manager, who had never seen an overqualified university graduate work with such profound integrity. Weeks bled into months, and the daily grind of the supermarket became Nnamdi's reality, but deep within the quiet chambers of his heart, the flame of his dream never truly died. Every single night, after the heavy iron shutters of the store were pulled down and locked, while his body pushed through a state of utter exhaustion, Nnamdi wouldn't go straight home. He would sit under the dim light of a street lamp outside the shop, pull out a battered notebook, and carefully study his engineering manuals by the flickering bulb. He would meticulously rewrite his resume on a cheap smartphone, submitting his applications to dozens of smaller firms, refusing to let the shadow of Mr. Henderson's cruelty turn him bitter or cynical. He held on to his mother's words like a sacred life jacket in the middle of a stormy sea. If a job belongs to you, the universe will make it wait. He remained completely oblivious to the fact that miles away, in the corporate stratosphere, a massive tectonic shift was happening. Mr. Darrow had just returned from his grueling offshore shift, and the moment he landed on solid ground, his wife, Ifeoma, had wept in his arms as she recounted the story of the nameless saint who had saved her life and missed his destiny because of it. Mr. Darrow's eyes had burned with an intense, quiet rage against the unknown corporate entity that had treated his wife's savior so monstrously. He vowed in his heart that he would find this young man, no matter how long it took, to repay a debt that money could never fully satisfy. 3 months after that fateful morning, the invisible threads of destiny finally tightened into a perfect knot. On a bustling Saturday morning inside the supermarket, Nnamdi was kneeling on the cold floor, his uniform shirt slightly damp with sweat, as he neatly stacked heavy boxes of baby diapers onto the lower shelves. The store was filled with the ambient noise of shopping carts and crying children. Suddenly, a soft, familiar voice drifted over the aisle, laced with a hint of frustration. "Darling, look at this. They don't have the specific imported brand our pediatrician recommended. I've searched everywhere." Nnamdi froze, his engineering mind instantly recognizing the melodic, gentle cadence of the voice. He slowly stood up, wiping his dusty hands on his apron, and turned around to see an elegantly dressed couple standing just a few feet away. It was Ifeoma, looking radiant and healthy, holding a detailed shopping list, and standing beside her was a tall, imposing man with a stern but deeply intelligent face. Mr. Darrow himself. Nnamdi took a tentative step forward, his heart beginning to thud against his ribs as the memory of that chaotic morning flashed behind his eyes. "Excuse me, Mrs. Ifeoma?" he asked quietly, his voice uncertain. Ifeoma stopped mid-sentence, turning her head toward the young attendant. She blinked once, twice, her eyes scanning his uniform, his face, and then suddenly a look of profound, electric recognition washed over her features. She gasped loudly, dropping her shopping list straight onto the floor. "Nnamdi, oh my God, Nnamdi, is that really you?" she cried out, her voice trembling with an immediate rush of intense emotion. She rushed forward, completely ignoring social etiquette, and gripped his arms tightly. Darling, look, look! This is him. This is the young man I told you about. The one who saved my life and our baby boy, mister. Darrow's face transformed from a mask of calm composure into a state of absolute shock and profound respect. He stepped forward, his massive hand instantly engulfing Nnamdi's in a tight, crushing handshake that vibrated with deep, masculine gratitude. Nnamdi, Mr. Darrow said, his voice deep and thick with uncontainable emotion. I have spent the last 12 weeks praying to meet you. You don't know what you did for my family. You are the reason my son is breathing today. But tell me, why are you working here? What happened to that life-changing interview you were running to that morning? Nnamdi looked down at his cheap supermarket uniform, a small sad smile playing on his lips. I made it to the building, sir, Nnamdi whispered, the old pain flaring up in his chest. But I was 32 minutes late because of the hospital run. The head of human resources wouldn't even let me explain. He insulted my background, called me gutter trash, threw my resume away, and had me blacklisted and dragged out by security. He told me that rules are more important than human lives. The moment those words left Nnamdi's mouth, the temperature in the aisle seemed to drop to sub-zero levels. Mr. Darrow's eyes narrowed into slits of pure lethal anger, his jaw clenching so hard the veins in his neck bulged. The viewer can feel the terrifying buildup of suspense as the hidden truth begins to rise to the surface. Mr. Darrow slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek leather-bound corporate wallet, flipping it open to reveal a gold-embossed identification badge that bore the massive, unmistakable logo of Jamari Oil and Gas. He looked at Nnamdi, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper that signaled an impending storm. He threw you out? Tell me, young man, what was the name of the man who did this to you? Nnamdi swallowed hard, completely stunned by the logo on the badge. His name was Mr. Henderson, sir, the head of HR. Mr. Darrow let out a dark, chilling laugh that promised utter devastation. Henderson, Mr. Darrow whispered, looking at his wife, who was gasping in horror at the revelation. He has no idea who I am. He thinks I am just an engineer. He doesn't know that my father owns 40% of the shares of Jamari Oil and Gas, and that I was recently appointed as the incoming chief executive officer, taking over next week. Nnamdi, tomorrow morning at exactly 8 a.m., I want you to put on your best suit. You are coming back to Jamari Oil and Gas, and you are going to watch me rewrite the rules of justice. The curtain falls on this part with an explosive cliffhanger, leaving the audience cheering in wild anticipation for the massive, catastrophic exposure of the villain that is about to unfold. The morning sun rose over the central business district of Aya like a blazing torch of divine reckoning, its bright light reflecting off the massive glass facade of the Jamari Oil and Gas skyscraper. Inside the executive boardroom on the top floor, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Mr. Henderson sat at the head of a long mahogany conference table, surrounded by senior department heads and board members, reviewing the final hiring roster for the graduate trainee program. He was completely in his element, exuding an air of arrogant, untouchable authority as he signed off on nepotistic appointments, casually laughing with his colleagues about how easy it was to manipulate the corporate structure for his own gain. He had completely forgotten about the poor, disheveled young man he had brutally humiliated and blacklisted 3 months prior. To Henderson, people like Nnamdi were merely invisible statistics, disposable garbage that had no place in his world of luxury and influence. He leaned back in his leather chair, checking his luxury watch with a smug grin, completely oblivious to the fact that the invisible trap of karma had just been sprung, and the jaws of absolute ruin were about to snap shut around his career. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the boardroom were thrown open with a violent force that startled everyone in the room. The casual chatter ceased instantly as Mr. Darrow strode into the room, his face a mask of cold, unyielding thunder. But he was not alone. Walking right beside him, dressed in his immaculate, perfectly ironed corporate suit, was Nnamdi. Nnamdi walked, with his head held high, his shoulders square, carrying his weathered manila folder, with a quiet, dignified confidence that radiated throughout the entire room. Mr. Henderson's eyes widened in immediate confusion, which rapidly mutated into a flash of venomous irritation as he recognized Nnamdi's face. He slammed his hands onto the table, standing up aggressively, his voice dripping with his usual haughty condescension. "What is the meaning of this outrageous intrusion?" Henderson roared, pointing a shaking finger directly at Nnamdi. "Security! How did this gutter-born trash bypass the lobby turnstiles?" This boy is a blacklisted vagrant whom I personally ordered to be ejected from this property months ago for gross unprofessionalism and tardiness. Get him out of my sight before I have everyone on the security team fired." Mr. Darrow did not flinch. He walked slowly to the head of the table, his footsteps echoing with an ominous weight that made the entire board of directors freeze in their seats. He looked at Mr. Henderson with an icy, lethal glare that instantly caused the arrogant HR manager's voice to falter. "Sit down, Henderson," Mr. Darrow said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, vibrating whisper that chilled the entire room. Henderson blinked, his arrogance suddenly wavering. "Excuse me, Mr. Darrow, you are just an offshore engineer. You do not have the administrative authority to speak to me in this manner." Before Henderson could finish his sentence, Mr. Darrow slammed a heavy leather corporate folder onto the table, sliding it directly in front of the board members. "As of 8 a.m. this morning, Henderson, I am no longer just an engineer. My family has executed our absolute voting blocks, and the board has officially ratified my appointment as the incoming chief executive officer and chairman of Jamari Oil and Gas," Mr. Darrow announced, his voice booming like thunder. The entire room gasped, and the color drained from Mr. Henderson's face, so fast he looked as though he had seen a ghost. His hands began to tremble violently as the reality of his catastrophic mistake began to pierce his arrogant brain. Darrow stepped closer to Henderson, his eyes burning with a furious, righteous anger. 3 months ago, a young man arrived at this building 32 minutes late for an interview. He didn't lose track of time because he was lazy or undisciplined, Henderson. He was late because he found my heavily pregnant wife collapsing in a pool of blood, alone in our compound, while I was offshore. This young man, whom you called gutter trash, chose to sacrifice the most important opportunity of his life, chose to risk his entire future, to drive my wife to the emergency room and save the lives of my wife and my newborn son. When he came here, desperate, sweating, and begging for just 5 minutes to present his brilliant academic credentials, you didn't even open his file. You insulted his poverty, you mocked his background, you threw his dream into the garbage, and you blacklisted him from the industry just to feed your pathetic, sick ego. The viewer watches in absolute, breathless triumph as Mr. Henderson begins to hyperventilate, his eyes darting frantically around the room as the senior board members look at him with expressions of deep disgust and horror, panic and absolute humiliation completely consumed in the antagonist. Mr. Henderson's knees buckled, and he literally sank into his chair, his forehead breaking out in a torrential sweat as his breath came in short, ragged gasps. He looked at Nnamdi, his chest heaving, his face twisted in a pathetic mask of terror as he realized his entire life of privilege was evaporating in real time. "Sir, Mr. Darrow, please, I didn't know. I swear to you, I was just enforcing the strict company punctuality policy. I didn't know she was your wife," Henderson stammered, his voice cracking as he desperately tried to crawl toward Mr. Darrow, completely stripped of his pride. If he had just explained, Nnamdi stepped forward, his voice calm, steady, and filled with a devastating moral superiority that crushed Henderson's pathetic excuses. "I did try to explain, Mr. Henderson," Nnamdi said softly, looking down at the broken man. "I begged you for just 5 minutes. I told you a human life was on the line, but you told me that rules and corporate image were more important than human lives. You told me people from my background don't belong in these chairs." Mr. Darrow didn't allow the villain to speak another word. He stood tall, delivering the ultimate stroke of karmic justice that the audience had been waiting for. "Your rules are over, Henderson. You are stripped of your position as head of HR immediately. You are fired for gross ethical misconduct, corruption, and bringing severe disrepute to the corporate name of Jamari Oil and Gas. Furthermore, I am initiating a full forensic audit into every single hiring decision you have made over the last 5 years, and if I find a single trace of bribery or nepotism, I will personally ensure you spend the next 10 years of your life rotting in a maximum security prison cell. Security stripped this man of his corporate ID, pack his personal belongings in a cardboard box, and throw him out into the street through the main lobby, so every single employee can watch the fall of a tyrant." 2 heavy security guards stepped into the room, grabbing the weeping, trembling Mr. Henderson by his expensive suit jacket, dragging him away as he begged and cried for mercy that would never come. Turning to Nnamdi, Mr. Darrow's face softened into a warm, deeply proud smile. He reached out, took Nnamdi's manila file, and placed it on the table. "Nnamdi, your trial is officially over. By the power vested in me as CEO, you are hereby appointed as the Chief Graduate Engineer of Jamari Oil and Gas, with a starting salary and benefit package that will ensure your mother never has to step foot on another farm for the rest of her life. Welcome to your destiny, my brother. The complete, flawless triumph of justice is achieved, leaving the viewers in a state of absolute emotional euphoria as Nnamdi stands in the boardroom, tears of pure victory washing away the pain of his past. The swift and devastating blow of cosmic karma that leveled Mr. Henderson's empire of arrogance sent shockwaves through the entire corporate community of Aya, proving once and for all that the scales of justice always balance themselves in the end. Within 48 hours of his humiliating expulsion from the executive boardroom, the comprehensive forensic audit ordered by Mr. Darrow unearthed a massive, rotten web of bribery, extortion, and systemic nepotism that Henderson had secretly orchestrated for over half a decade. He was not merely fired, he was stripped of his corporate stock options, his luxury company vehicle was seized, and his high society reputation was completely obliterated as local news outlets plastered his tearful, handcuffed face across television screens. Unable to afford the massive legal fees required to fight the multi-billion-dollar energy conglomerate, the fallen antagonist was forced to sell his sprawling suburban villa and watch his bank accounts freeze under court order. He who had once laughed at the plight of a starving young graduate found himself completely broke, abandoned by his wealthy Fairweather associates, and facing a looming, multi-year prison sentence in a dark, cold cell. The harsh poetic reality of his downfall served as a stark warning to the elite. Those who step on the poor while climbing the ladder of success will eventually slide down the very same ladder, hitting every single rung of misery on their way to the bottom. In beautiful, breathtaking contrast to the villain's ruin, Nnamdi's life underwent a magnificent, fairy tale transformation that felt like a brilliant sunrise after a lifetime of torrential storms. On his very first official day as the Chief Graduate Engineer of Jamari Oil and Gas, he arrived in a company-issued vehicle, walking through the high-security glass turnstiles not as a desperate beggar, but as a highly respected leader whose salary instantly placed him among the city's upper echelon. His first administrative act after receiving his massive sign-on bonus was to board a premium flight to his home village, his heart pounding with pure, unadulterated joy. When he stepped onto the dusty paths of his childhood community, he didn't head to a farm. He drove straight to the field where his mother was bent double, weeding the soil under a blazing sun. With tears pouring down his face, Nnamdi gently lifted her up, throwing her calloused hands over his shoulders as he whispered, "Mama, it is over. Your suffering is permanently finished." Right then and there, he relocated her to the most luxurious residential estate in the capital city, building her a massive, multi-bedroom brick mansion complete with private security, lush gardens, and personal assistants, ensuring that the incredible woman who had broken her back to buy him bread would spend the rest of her days wrapped in absolute comfort, luxury, and peace. The incredible story of Nnamdi, Ifeoma, and Mr. Darrow stands as an enduring, timeless monument to the supreme law of life, the golden law of karma, loyalty, and divine intervention. It proves with absolute certainty that no act of genuine human kindness, no matter how costly or terrifying it feels in the moment, is ever truly lost or wasted in the grand design of the universe. When Nnamdi stood on that dusty sidewalk, caught between the selfish desire to secure his own future and the selfless urge to save a dying stranger, his choice to prioritize a human life over a piece of corporate paper was the ultimate test of his soul. Had he walked past Ifeoma's cries to arrive early for his interview, he would have entered a department ruled by a corrupt, malicious manager who would have eventually destroyed his career anyway. By choosing path of mercy, he unknowingly unlocked a destiny far grander than anything his prayer sheet could have ever contained. Life may delay your breakthrough, it may test your integrity in the darkest fires of despair, and it may allow the arrogant to mock your tears for a season. But when your harvest of goodness finally arrives, it will bypass every human barrier, break every corrupt blacklist, and elevate you into a position of absolute triumph. This deeply emotional and instructive story leaves us with a profound, life-altering philosophical lesson that every single viewer watching this video must carry inside their heart forever. Never let the harshness, the cruelty, or the unfairness of this world corrupt your capacity for empathy and kindness. Wealth, social status, and corporate power are nothing but fleeting illusions that can vanish in a single afternoon. but the legacies of love, compassion, and character you build by helping those who cannot repay you is eternal. When life places you in a crucible of choice, where doing the right thing looks like it will cost you your personal success, remember Nnamdi. Trust that the universe sees your secret sacrifices and that doing good will always remain the most profitable investment a human being can make. Now, we want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in Nnamdi's shoes that morning? Would you have stopped to save a stranger? Or would you have run to the interview? Write your raw, honest thoughts and opinions down in the comment section below. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this powerful message today. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications so you never miss another captivating, life-changing story on this channel. Thank you for staying with us until the very end, and remember, always be kind, for karma is always watching.